Nanjing, December the 13th, 1937. The ancient capital of China has fallen. Japanese troops have breached the walls in 3 places, and now they pour through the gates into a city of over 500,000 trapped civilians. General Matsui Iwane, the frail Buddhist scholar commanding the assault, is absent sick in his tent outside the walls. Command on the ground belongs to Prince Asaka Yasuhiko, uncle by marriage to Emperor Hirohito himself. The prince has issued an order: kill all captives. What follows over the next 6 weeks will become one of the most documented atrocities in the history of modern warfare. Between 200,000 and 300,000 men, women, and children will be killed. Between 20,000 and 80,000 women will be raped. A third of the city will be burned to the ground. And 2 Japanese sub-lieutenants will hold a competition, reported as a sporting event in the Japanese press, to see which of them can behead 100 people first. The world will know. American journalists will file front-page dispatches. The United States government will intercept diplomatic cables from Tokyo's own foreign minister admitting the scale of the slaughter. And the world will do almost nothing. But to understand how Japan arrived at the gates of Nanjing with killing orders already in hand, you have to go back 6 years, to a moonlit railway line in Manchuria, and a bomb so small it could not even damage the track it was supposed to destroy. A lie, a puppet emperor, a military that had learned it could act without permission and get away with it every single time. This is the story of the dragon, the ideology that built Japan's empire in Asia, the campaign that tore China apart, and the silence that allowed it all to happen. The night of September the 18th, 1931. A stretch of railway track near the city of Mukden, in Manchuria. A small explosion so weak it barely scratched the rail line it was supposed to destroy. The explosion was a lie. It had been planted by 2 officers of Japan's Kwantung Army, Lieutenant Colonel Ishiwara Kanji and Colonel Itagaki Seishiro. They blew up their own track, blamed the Chinese, and used the attack as justification to launch a full military assault on Chinese forces in the region before their government in Tokyo had authorized anything. Tokyo was furious. Prime Minister Wakatsuki Reijiro tried to contain the crisis. His own military ministers lied to his face, claiming the army was acting in self-defense. 3 days later, the Korea Army sent reinforcements across the Yalu River without asking permission from anyone. They called it the Right of Field Initiative. In plain terms, we did it first, and you can punish us later. Nobody was punished. By March of 1932, Manchuria had been transformed into the puppet state of Manchukuo, with Henry Puyi, the last emperor of the Qing dynasty, installed as a figurehead, while the Kwantung Army ran everything behind him. Japan walked into the League of Nations, sat through the Lytton Commission's condemnation, and then simply walked out. The message to every ambitious officer in the Imperial Army was clear and permanent. A successful fait accompli will be forgiven. International law is a suggestion. The League of Nations is a talking club with no teeth. The lesson they drew from this was catastrophic. Back in Tokyo, the political heart of Japan was already bleeding. 2 factions were tearing the Imperial Army apart from the inside. The Kodo, the Imperial Way faction, believed in spiritual purity and identified the Soviet Union as the primary enemy. They were led by Generals Araki Sadao and Masaki Jinzaburo, men who believed that raw fighting spirit could overcome any material disadvantage. Against them stood the Tosei-ha, the Control faction, led by General Nagata Tetsuzan and a rising officer named Tojo Hideki. They wanted to modernize the army, build a war economy, and prepare Japan for total industrial conflict. The struggle turned lethal. On May 15, 1932, young naval officers shot Prime Minister Inukai Tsuyoshi dead in his own residence. They were given light sentences. The era of party government in Japan died with him. 3 years later, a Kodo-ha sympathizer named Lieutenant Colonel Aizawa Saburo walked into the War Ministry, found General Nagata Tetsuzan at his desk, and hacked him to death with a samurai sword. 6 months after that came the February 26th incident. Over 1,400 soldiers mutinied in snow-covered Tokyo. They assassinated the Lord Keeper of the Privy Seal, the Finance Minister, and the Inspector General of Military Training. They occupied government buildings for 4 days before Emperor Hirohito personally ordered their suppression. The coup failed, but its aftermath handed total power to the Control faction. The Kodoha was purged, and Tojo's people, the men who wanted a war economy and a continental empire, were now in control of the most powerful military institution in Japan. Driving all of it was an ideology that had no brakes. Japanese thinkers had spent decades constructing a vision of their nation as Asia's rightful leader, the power destined to liberate the continent from Western imperialism and bind it together under Japanese guidance. They called it Pan-Asianism. It was part genuine belief and part convenient justification, and it fused seamlessly with a hard economic reality. Japan had almost no natural resources, no oil, almost no iron. It depended entirely on imports to keep its factories running and its navy at sea. If a major war came and the control faction was certain one was coming, Japan could be strangled by a naval blockade in a matter of months. The solution, they decided, was China. North China specifically. Its coal, its iron, its agricultural land. General Nagata had called the northern provinces Japan's strategic rear area. By 1937, those 5 provinces had become, in the minds of Japan's military planners, not a foreign country's territory but a resource base that Japan required in order to survive. What Japan needed was a reason to take it. The reason arrived on the night of July the 7th, 1937. Japanese troops were conducting night maneuvers near Peking, at a bridge the West had named the Marco Polo Bridge. A brief exchange of gunfire occurred in the darkness. One Japanese soldier failed to appear at roll call. The local commander, Colonel Mutaguchi Renya, a man his own colleagues called a fire-eater, unilaterally escalated the situation. The missing soldier turned up almost immediately. Mutaguchi did not stand down. In Tokyo, Prime Minister Konoe Fumimaro and the Army High Command made a decision. This was the moment. Not to resolve the incident diplomatically, but to use it. To deliver what they called a resolute measure against Chinese forces. To punish China for what they characterized as years of harassment and provocation. A minor nighttime confusion. A missing soldier who was already back. A commander who loved to fight. That was enough. The decision to turn a skirmish into a full-scale war was made in Tokyo, deliberately, by men who understood exactly what they were choosing. By morning, the road to Nanjing was open. Japan's war plan had a name: Sokusen Soketsu, rapid combat and quick decision. War Minister Sugiyama Hajime told Emperor Hirohito that China would be brought to its knees within 1 to 3 months. It did not go according to plan. On August the 13th, 1937, Chiang Kai-shek opened a second front in Shanghai, the most international city in Asia, home to the foreign concessions, the business interests, and the press corps of a dozen countries. Chang committed his best units, the German-trained 87th and 88th Divisions, to a battle he designed not just to stop the Japanese advance, but to drag foreign powers into China's defense. For 3 months, the battle raged street by street. The terrain around Shanghai worked against everything Japan had planned. The spongy ground around Suzhou Creek swallowed tanks. The urban ruins of Xiaobei turned every city block into a fortification. Japanese infantry, expecting a quick collapse, were instead fed into frontal assaults against Chinese positions that refused to break. By the time Chinese forces finally withdrew in November, the cost was staggering. Japan had suffered over 40,000 casualties, including more than 11,000 dead. China had lost somewhere between 187,000 and 250,000 soldiers. Japan had won. And Japan was furious. The veterans who came out of Shanghai were exhausted, supply lines were stretched to breaking point, and their commanders were enraged at the resistance they had faced. On November the 7th, the Central China Area Army was formed under General Matsui Iwane, a 60-year-old Buddhist scholar who had spent years promoting Sino-Japanese friendship and was now being asked to lead an army toward China's ancient capital. His logistical situation was desperate. He ordered his men to live off the land. In practice, that meant looting. It meant burning. It meant that, before the army ever reached Nanjing, the countryside west of Shanghai was already being destroyed. The advance was rapid. 170 miles separated Shanghai from Nanjing. The Japanese covered them in weeks. On December the 2nd, Prince Asaka Yasuhiko arrived at the front to take direct command of the assault on the capital. He was the emperor's uncle. He was not a man anyone was going to argue with. Inside Nanjing, there was chaos. Chiang Kai-shek had fled on December the 7th, leaving by plane with his wife. He left behind General Tang Shengqi with somewhere between 90,000 and 100,000 troops, many of them raw recruits, many of them survivors of Shanghai who had nothing left. Tang made a public vow to fight to the death. His air force had already fled. His communications equipment was gone, taken by officials who had departed before him. He ordered a mile-wide scorched earth zone around the walls, burning ancient suburbs to deny the Japanese any cover. On December the 9th, General Matsui dropped leaflets over the city demanding surrender within 24 hours. Tang refused. On December the 10th, Japanese artillery began its bombardment. By December the 12th, the outer defenses had crumbled, and the walls had been breached in 3 places. Tang Shangqi ordered a general retreat on the evening of the 12th. It immediately became a rout. Tens of thousands of soldiers jammed the narrow tunnel at the Yijiang Gate in a desperate race for the northern docks. Men were crushed to death in the dark. At least one Chinese tank rolled over its own fleeing soldiers. Soldiers stripped off their uniforms and disappeared into the civilian population. At dawn on December the 13th, the Japanese pincer closed. The city was sealed. The 16th Division, under Lieutenant General Nakajima Kesago, smashed through the gates into a city of over 500,000 people. By nightfall, Japanese flags flew over the ancient capital. General Matsui was not there. He was ill, resting in his tent several miles outside the walls. The killing began the same day the city fell. General Nakajima's 16th Division had standing orders to take no prisoners. On December the 13th alone, his men executed an estimated 30,000 surrendered or fleeing Chinese soldiers. The single largest killing took place near Mufu Mountain, where an estimated 57,000 soldiers and civilians were herded to the riverbank and mowed down with machine guns. Nakajima noted in his own diary the logistical problem this created. It was difficult, he wrote, to find ditches large enough for the heaps of corpses. He wrote this as a complaint, not a confession. The violence spread through 4 categories, each one relentless, each one documented. The first was the mass execution of prisoners. The orders to take no captives were not issued in the heat of battle. They were issued before the walls were breached. Soldiers who surrendered, soldiers who threw down their rifles, soldiers who had discarded their uniforms and were hiding among civilians, all of them were hunted and killed. The second was the killing of ordinary civilians. Japanese troops moved house to house, shooting at random. Torture became a form of entertainment. Victims were buried to their chests and used for bayonet practice. They were torn apart by dogs. 2 sub-lieutenants, Mukai Toshiaki and Noda Takeshi, held a competition to see who could behead 100 people first. The Japanese press covered it like a sporting event, updating the score in print. The third was sexual violence. Historians estimate that between 20,000 and 80,000 women were raped during the 6 weeks of the massacre. These were not isolated incidents. They happened in broad daylight, in front of families, inside churches and nunneries. A soldier named Azuma Shiro later testified that he felt no guilt that his victims seemed to him like animals. A survivor named Li Zhaoing, 7 months pregnant, was attacked by 3 soldiers. She fought back. She survived 37 bayonet wounds. The fourth was systematic destruction. Japanese soldiers looted every shop and home in the city, including those marked with foreign flags. Then they set fire to a third of Nanjing using chemical accelerants. The fires burned for 6 weeks. Against all of this stood a handful of foreigners, 22 men and women, diplomats, missionaries, business people who had stayed behind when everyone else fled, established the international safety zone in a 2.5 square mile area of the city. At its peak, the zone sheltered between 200,000 and 250,000 people. Japanese soldiers violated it constantly, dragging men away to be shot and abducting women for military brothels. 2 figures became the moral center of the zone. John Rabe was a German businessman, a Siemens manager, and the leader of the local Nazi party chapter. He wore his party badge and his swastika armband as shields, throwing himself physically between Japanese soldiers and their victims, invoking the name of Hitler's alliance with Japan. He sheltered over 600 people in his own garden. The Chinese called him the living Buddha of Nanjing. He was a Nazi. He saved thousands of lives. History does not offer clean heroes. Minnie Vautrin was an American missionary and the acting president of Ginling College. She turned the campus into a fortress, sheltering 10,000 women inside its gates. She stood at the entrance, day after day, confronting Japanese patrols who came looking for women to take. Her diary is one of the most harrowing documents of the 20th century, page after page of what she witnessed, written in the flat. Careful prose of a woman trying to stay sane while the world outside her gates went insane. She returned to the United States in 1940. She had a complete mental breakdown. She took her own life the following year. She was 54 years old. How many people died in Nanjing? The honest answer is that nobody knows precisely. Bodies burn. Rivers carry the dead away. Burial records are incomplete. And the question itself became a political battlefield almost immediately after the killing stopped. Here is what the evidence says. Japan's own foreign minister, Hirota Koki, sent a cable in early 1938 that was intercepted by American intelligence. It admitted to the slaughter of not less than 300,000 Chinese civilians. This was not a document produced by China or by the Allied tribunals after the war. It was a Japanese diplomatic cable, sent in Japan's own coded communications, by a man who was trying to manage the international fallout from what his country's soldiers had done. General Matsui eventually wept in front of his officers. He called what had happened the most grievous effect his army had produced. He had issued moral commandments before the city fell, ordering disciplined conduct. He had been absent in his tent while those commandments were ignored. The Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal, which ran from 1946 to 1948, accepted a figure of over 200,000 dead. The Chinese government maintains 300,000, supported by burial records and the findings of the separate Nanjing war crimes trial. Japanese revisionists have proposed figures as low as a few thousand, or argued the massacre did not happen at all. General Matsui Iwane was convicted at Tokyo and hanged in 1948. Foreign Minister Hirota Koki was also convicted and hanged partly for his failure to act on the reports of atrocities he had personally received. Prince Asaka Yasuhiko, who commanded the assault on Nanjing and who allegedly issued the kill all captives order, was never called as a witness. General Douglas MacArthur had extended immunity to the entire imperial family before the trials began. The emperor's uncle lived until 1981. He died in his bed, at the age of 93, having never answered a single question about December 1937. Emperor Hirohito himself was granted total immunity by the American occupation, which had determined that prosecuting the emperor would destabilize Japan and complicate the emerging Cold War alliance. He remained on the throne until 1989. The silence about Nanjing did not end with the war. It deepened. As the Cold War hardened and the United States needed Japan as a stable anti-communist ally, Japan's wartime bureaucracy was left largely intact. In 1957, Kishi Nobusuke, a man who had been imprisoned as a Class A war crimes suspect and never tried, was elected prime minister. The old guard was back, and it brought its version of history with it. Starting in the 1950s, Japan's Ministry of Education began systematically softening references to the massacre in school curricula. Censors replaced the word invasion with advance. They reframed the killings as regrettable incidents that occurred in the confusion of battle rather than as calculated policy. A historian named Ienaga Saburo spent 30 years fighting this in court, winning partial victories and losing others, while the textbooks kept shrinking the record. The controversy exploded into an international diplomatic crisis in 1982 when China and South Korea filed formal protests against Japan's attempt to erase its record of aggression from official history. In 1997, a young Chinese-American writer named Iris Chang published a book called The Rape of Nanking. It became a global bestseller. It broke decades of Western silence about the massacre and triggered a furious backlash inside Japan. A politician named Ishihara Shintaro called it a story fabricated by the Chinese. A revisionist author named Tanaka Masaaki published his own book attempting to debunk the massacre using General Matsui's diary as evidence, and was later caught having falsified over 900 entries in that same primary source. The man who falsified a diary to deny a massacre was trying to rewrite history. He got further than he should have. Today, the Nanjing Massacre Memorial Hall stands in the city where the killing happened. Its walls carry the names of the dead. The Chinese state has made Nanjing central to its national identity, a wound that justifies grievance, a memory that is invoked every time Japan and China sit across a table from each other. In Japan, many scholars have spent careers documenting the truth. Many journalists have risked their livelihoods to insist on it. And the conservative mainstream has continued to minimize, to quarrel over numbers, to call the documented testimony of survivors and soldiers and foreign witnesses into question. Here is what is not in question. The massacre happened. It was witnessed by dozens of foreigners who wrote it down in real time. It was documented by Japanese soldiers in their own diaries, their own letters home, their own photographs. It was admitted by Japan's own foreign minister in a coded cable that American intelligence intercepted before the blood on the streets of Nanjing had dried. The only question that history has not answered, the one that sits at the center of this entire story, is not whether it happened. It is why a country that committed one of the best documented atrocities of the 20th century decided that the most effective response was to spend the next 80 years arguing about whether it happened at all. And across Asia, in the years that followed Nanjing, Japan was not finished. The dragon had only just started to move.